Yeah,
So,
we can get started then. Let's
yeah.
just do a quick introduction. Just for the THORChain weekly live update. Thanks for joining. I'm Familiar Cow. This is not THORChain. Just Familiar Cow. I have to host on this account because that's how spaces work on iPhones. So hey everybody.
And I'm Chad THOReau. I help out with hosting these spaces and a bunch of other spaces too, kind of in the THORChain ecosystem, just trying to spread the word and help where I can, and making education for THORswap too, but mostly just member of the community and big fan of THORChain.
And I'm Chad Barraford. I'm one of the core devs in the project, and I like to kind of talk about the project and advocate for it, educate on it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So the purpose of this show is basically to get user feedback from from community members and get updates from the core devs, being Chad Barraford, mostly along with the Nine Realms team that sometimes comes on. We do this every Friday, just around the same time. Although we might switch it up just that way. And I know there's a lot of people overseas, so if you have suggestions on uh, time time considerations and things like that, make sure you let us know. So that way, your voice can be heard and it can be considered. But these recordings are always available immediately afterwards on Twitter. You just click you just click the button for the space, and the recording should be right there. And it's also uploaded to Runebase afterwards.
Slick.
Sweet. So let's hear what's going on this week in THORChain. So there was another. There are more nodes being added to the network, and that gave way to a third Asgard vault. So we just sharded into a second Asgard vault not that long ago. So would you be able to explain the significance of what an Asgard vault is and why the sharding is significant?
Yeah, so the network originally in single chain chaos net, the network would only allow a single Asgard. And so because of that, the network limited the total number of validators on the network. I think it was set to like 36 or something like this. And the reason why that was because flexible signatures, the way that functions is the more people or more members of that party, in a sense, that combine together to create a signature to send out some Bitcoin or something like this, the slower the network gets in a quadratic fashion. Right, the slower not so much the network, excuse me, but the signing process. The signing becomes slower and slower and slower. And so in multi-chain, one of the improvements made between single chain and multi-chain was that the idea that the network could have several Asgards with no upper limit on how many could exist. And so when we went from 39 nodes to 40 nodes and validator nodes, we split the Asgards into two vaults. So every 40 validators we basically add to the network. Now we're at 81. We add another Asgard once you're beyond the maximum number. So we shelled into our third Asgard, and likely the network will probably pause adding new validators at either 100 validators or 120 validators. Right now it's set to 100. It might change to 120 depending upon how the community feels about that. And so that will basically lock us into having three Asgard vaults, which will probably be what it's going to be for the foreseeable future. And we can go above 120 if we wanted to. If we wanted to go to 150 or 180 or 250, there's no reason why we can't do that from a technical perspective. But the community will have to figure out whether or not that's something we want to do or don't want to do, or measure the pros and the cons and all that kind of stuff.
What would be any cons of going over 100? Like, I've seen the 120 number. I know that there's also, isn't there something significant about like 300 being a long-term max of some kind?
Yeah, so you could get into a situation where when you add more and more validators, that the Tendermint block time may start to slow. We're not seeing that quite yet. I think the block times are still 5.6 seconds or so on average. Which is what it was from day one. But if you get into really higher numbers, you might see the block time slow down a bit. And maybe that's not the behavior that we want to have within the community. And so it becomes an argument about, or a debate about, how many validators are enough validators to be efficiently decentralized. The other thing you have to think about is, how much capital is there to actually add to the bond side, right? I mean, how many nodes can we actually run, right? I mean, how many people have that kind of quantity? And we might say that, okay, we're going to add, a single node operator can add bond from multiple Thor addresses, Thor addresses, and so you can kind of expand the number of nodes in the network and the number of capital network that way. We kind of talk about vault nodes and that kind of stuff, but that doesn't relate to what we're talking about here in the context of validators that are committing blocks and managing Asgard vaults. Light nodes don't do that, so that would be a separate entity in a sense, and that can scale up to hundreds and thousands potentially. I don't think you'd actually see that quantity in reality, but there's no upper limit on how many that can be supported there. Validators, the only limitation is just basically either what Tendermint can support and what the capital of the THORChain community can support. Basically, one or two of those things.
So, I was hearing recently that the maximum validator count, I guess you were just saying this before, is capped at 100 right now, or
Yep.
120. So, is that the plan for like the short term, or what's the plan like going forward, like into mainnet and beyond that?
Yeah, the plan right now is there's a kind of debate that the community should have around whether we should leave it at 100 or leave it at 120. And I don't think that debate really needs to happen today. I think let's just get to 100, which will happen in the next month or so. And then once we're at 100, we can kind of take a look at the state of the community, the state of the nodes, and kind of have a healthy conversation and a debate about what makes sense. Because once we get to 100, we hit that max, we'll start to see some bond wars happening again, and the minimum bond to get to the network will naturally start to increase again. Now that we hit the max supply of slots, and the demand increases, and therefore the amount of rune being used to churn in should naturally increase as well. And so maybe we want to say that we're okay with the state of things at that time, or maybe we want to say that we're not okay and we want to expand it to more validators. We can do that too. These limits are just arbitrary configurations that can be changed by the community via a node mimir command to change this from 100 to 120. If we want to do that, the community can go make that assertion and make it happen.
So what's your thoughts on bond war versus basically limiting the amount of nodes, but having more of a bond war versus expanding the number of nodes that can participate in the network, and not so much bond war, but kind of more nodes can participate. And to be fair, there's a lot of nodes that will be coming online with the announcement of like the seed unlocking, which will be directly put into bond nodes, correct?
Right. I mean that's going to be a lot of rune. That the early investors who bet big into THORChain in the very, very early days, and they have access to a lot of rune. And we want that rune to be active. We want that rune to be participating in the network and contribute to the kind of core mechanisms and economics of the network. And so we want to properly incentivize that. And we already had that conversation with a lot of those investors, And so we're going to start to see bond wars eventually. But the question becomes of what makes more sense from the network's perspective, and that's a debatable thing. I think what's probably makes more sense to me is that if you expand the number of validators, assuming that the network can actually support that, then you'll probably gain more rune that way than if you allow bond wars just to take off and kind of battle it out. I think you'll scale up the bond faster over a shorter period of time if you go with that mechanism, which is partly why we changed the number of validators that churn into the network from additional validators from 1 to 2 months back, because we wanted to scale up the bond quicker and faster, and that was effective to do so. If we move that number back from 2 back to 1, you'd see more bond wars because less people would be churning in on each churn. But you would also see that the total number of rune in the network would not scale as quickly. In theory, if we were to change it today to be like, okay, we're going to add 10 new validators in addition to the ones that left on every churn, you'd probably see a faster amount of bond coming in the network quicker. But that's a debate for the community to have. But I don't think we want to get to a place where we're scaling the bond up too quickly. I think we want it to happen naturally and not try to pump it in a sense.
Yeah, I think that would be a good problem to have, though. If anything, it seems like there's typically more concern on that side, like scaling the bond in proportion to how much liquidity potentially wants to come in. But yeah,
Yeah. And at
cool to
this
see.
moment, we have 20 million rune in the pools, and we have the soft cap is currently at 24 million. So we're not really in a place where the bond is really an issue at this moment. I mean, it was a thing that people were talking about a month or two ago, whatever it was. But right now, it's not an issue. I mean, we're about to launch Terra pretty soon as well, and that's obviously going to a lot of liquidity is going to come in there, and we'll see how that changes things, obviously. But right now we're doing well in terms of like naturally the network has hit its equilibrium without the soft cap enforcing it. It's actually happened naturally on itself. So I'm actually quite happy with how much runes in the pools and how much runes in the bond in this moment. I'm sure they'll both expand and grow, of course, but it's hit its natural equilibrium without anybody needing to govern that or force it into submission.
So speaking of the equilibrium and like Terra being launched on THORChain, one thing that was announced during the developer update, the Medium article that's put out on this account, which I could probably pin up here in a minute or two. But it was announced that with the release of Terra on THORChain, that the artificial caps would be lifted. So could you talk a little bit about that, and also
Yep.
The incentive pendulum in relation to that, and what that means for people that will be pooling with Terra and it's in scaling the network as well, because I think there's a lot of implications that kind of come with that, especially with a large amount of liquidity that it will likely be added once Terra is released.
Yeah. So in the earlier days, we wanted to have this kind of soft cap because the security of the network needs to be kind of grown with the pools in tandem with each other, and you don't want them to be growing a lot faster than the other, especially in the earlier days where there's not a lot of room in the bond side, and the amount of capital to stack the pools is not that much required to get to that place where you're maxing out the system. And then all of a sudden you get this problem of like, oh, THORChain sucks because I added liquidity, but I'm not really getting any yield because the caps are like at the hard cap, and that just kind of creates this kind of like media kind of thing in tweets of people kind of shitting on THORChain because its yield is so low, blah blah blah, and all these things. And it's easy to get into that place in the early days because there's just so little room within the bond, because the bond needs to be grown. We've now got to the place where we have I don't know the numbers off my head. I think it's like 33 million or 34 million, whatever the hell the number is, rune on the bond side, which is a really good amount. And everybody who wanted to LP into the system now can LP into the system without worrying about being capped or whatever. And so we don't really need to kind of worry about that scenario that we might have been concerned in the earlier days when it was just first getting launched and getting it on its feet. Once Terra launches, we're hoping to see a lot of participation from the lunatics to add liquidity and swap and all this kind of stuff. We'll see how well that kind of pans out. I'm not a fortune teller myself, but I'm hoping that those pools will get a good amount of depth. And probably won't be day one. Like this is going to take a couple of weeks for people to kind of move over and all that kind of stuff. Especially if a lot of lunatics have locked up their Luna into Terra and they can't actually access it. But I think over the time span of a week or two, we should see the pools get sufficiently deep to be liquid enough to support a sizable trade.
Yeah, I'd imagine it takes at least a few weeks, because a lot of people will like see it go live and then they'll be like, oh, that's cool. Let me start to undelegate and wait the 3 weeks. So I'm sure it'll be deep enough at the beginning, but then I think we'll really see it start to deepen like a month in or something.
Yeah, we've been talking to THOReau as well and the team over at Terra and trying to get some. We made a kind of a spoken word agreement that they would be a LP and contribute a good amount of liquidity into these pools to help get them to be liquid and deep and to support their own community in a sense. And so we're working with them to do that. And of course, the Treasury is going to probably take a sizable position in that pool just to help support that chain and those assets and the depth of the network itself. And so we're going to continue to support that as well. And then hopefully we'll see a bunch of lunatics just kind of like jump in as well and throw in some Luna, throw in some Rune, throw in some UST, throw some Rune, and help contribute.
Yeah, absolutely. It's is there any update on timeline that you know? I know there might have been some changes there. I know we don't have Pluto on, but just do you know anything there?
Yeah, so we've been talking internally about THOReau, of course. We want to make sure that things are done in a secure way. So we were in a conversation now about COSM WASM and the potential security risks involved with COSM WASM, and none of us as core devs are COSM WASM experts. We're not THOReau experts. We're more so THORChain experts. And this is going to be, I think, an ongoing struggle. I think we're going to have is that every time we add a new chain, we have to, in some sense, become experts in somebody else's ecosystem. And so we want to make sure that the COSM WASM doesn't play a risk to the THORChain network in terms of being able to open up exploits and this kind of thing. But I think we're feeling pretty bullish on it at this point. I think we sufficiently blocked COSM WASM applications from being able to interact with THORChain directly. Ones that do want to interact will have to be whitelisted and go through a vetting process first to make sure there's nothing malicious going on there. But I'm still bullish that we'll get THOReau launched on mainnet with this month, within a week or two.
Nice. Yeah, that's great to hear. And I think everyone understands, like, obviously security takes priority, and I'll happily wait another week or two if it means like making sure everything is really locked down.
Yeah. I mean, fundamentally it works. I think people have seen it happen on StageNet where I think somebody swapped, from Astroport into Doge directly in a single transaction, which is pretty fucking cool if you think about it. And so everything fundamentally works. We just want to make sure that everything gets audited correctly and everything's secure. And once we have that kind of confidence about it, I think that's probably the time that it'll be launched and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that was cool to see. I think that was Pluto that posted that. So like that was really demonstrating not only the THOReau swap on THORChain, but also like the aggregator, right? So it's pretty cool to see that like live and being tested, going from, I think it was it Doge all the way to Astro, or Astro all the way to Doge, or maybe both, but
yeah,
pretty cool to see that.
Yeah, so like the network already today out of the box already supports what we call swap in aggregation, but doesn't quite yet support swap out aggregation. So swap in integration is like when the ending DEX is THORChain. So you start in potentially 1 inch, or you start in Astroport, or you start at something like this, and then you swap into THORChain, and then the final result is the asset that's going out. In this case, it was Doge, but it could be Bitcoin, it could be Ethereum, it could be any assets that matter. Swap out is a little bit more complicated and requires more time. We already opened up one of the PRs to get swap out to work so that THORChain can send assets to 1 inch or Astroport. There's another PR that has to be validated and audited and emerged and all that kind of stuff. And then there's one more PR about that enables THOReau to support it. And then we have to enable Bifrost to support it. That's going to be probably a separate PR. But overall, those changes are relatively simple. It's actually not that complicated of a change, which is kind of funny to think about because it's a significantly important feature that has a lot of value to it, but it's actually very easy to implement from our perspective. And so that's going to happen, which is going to happen probably in version 81 or 82 of the network will probably support swap out. And once that happens, that's one thing I've been talking to people here in East Denver is like the idea of DEX aggregation. I've been trying to connect with various people and get them interested and excited about the idea, this idea that you can swap any and all asset from any DEX to any DEX is pretty, amazing concept. And so I'm trying to meet up with people from like 1 inch and, other, places and DEXs and such to kind of start the conversation. We were talking to like Badger DAO recently, and getting integration there potentially. So we're pulling on our connections and contacts, and I'm trying to make more connections here at East Denver so that we can proliferate THORChain to other ecosystems.
Yeah, that kind of got me like hypothesizing that it almost sounds like the swap in is like almost like better from a inbound like marketing perspective, because it's like that would allow like say Astroport to integrate it like right away, because then it would be like from going like you'd start on Astroport and end up in Bitcoin or something like that.
Right.
Is the easier part, right? So then
Yep.
that puts THORChain, that becomes like this inbound route into THORChain from all these other places, which is like probably the more important integration, arguably.
Yeah, 'cause that's the first one that happens in the sense that like obviously the most important asset in crypto is Bitcoin because it's like obviously the hugest one. And so getting a Bitcoin pair to move out of Terra into Bitcoin is like a big deal to me. That's a very big deal. But once we get the swap out integration working, you can go from Astroport to THORChain to 1inch, and then 1inch is actually doing Uni and Sushi and like splitting the transactions into like multiple. It's very complicated, but from your perspective, from a UI perspective, you're just like clicking a button, and everything else just kind of like everything else is happens behind the scenes.
Yeah, totally. We should clarify that. Like all this stuff that sounds very complicated is all in the. It's all in order to make it actually a lot less complicated.
Yeah, I mean, from your perspective, it doesn't make a difference whether you're swapping from Ethereum to USDC, like within the Ethereum ecosystem, or you're going from Ethereum to Bitcoin, or you're going to Ethereum to Astroport, to Terra, or whatever. Like all those things are equal in their complexity from a user's perspective, from a UI UX perspective. You might pay a little bit more in fees because you're going through multiple dexes and swapping, and there's more and more slippage, the more dexes you go through, and the more gas that's consumed as part of that. So you might pay more in fees, but from a UI perspective, it's identical. There's not any different from a UX perspective. So that's huge. That's mega huge.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's a lot better because you don't have to worry about having to go 10 different places and having 10 different wallets and doing all these sketchy things to get where you're going. It's just going to be one wallet, one click. Everything's connected to everything. Huge.
I mean, if you're like a person who's like into Atom Coin and you want to move into Bitcoin per se, like there's like 4 steps you got to go through, to get there, which is prohibitively complex, I would say. But soon enough, like none of that will matter, and everything is just one hop away. And when everything is one hop away, it feels like everything is the same. Like we have this mentality that we have these different ecosystems. That's like, oh, Terra's over there, and Ethereum's over there, and Tezos is over there, and whatever. Like all these things are these separate kind of things that exist onto themselves that are completely isolated. It's almost like thinking of them as different countries in a sense. But if everything is one hop away and everything is just like the same from a UX perspective, then it becomes not so much separate countries, but like one world. And that's a very, very, very different thing. And that's part of what we need in order to make crypto successful and become mainstream and have wider adoption, is making it simple. And the idea that I have to understand 12 different ecosystems to function is a bit, gnarly. I can do that, and you can do that because we're early adopters, and we spend the time and effort to understand and read articles and watch YouTube videos or whatever it is that we do. But my mom's not going to do that, of course. Neither is yours, probably, right? And so, in order to get to that place where crypto is widely adopted, it has to be a lot simpler than it is. And DEX aggregation is, I think, a monumental step in that direction.
Yeah,
you're talking about one world a little bit. Chad THOReau and I were on a space yesterday. We're doing a casual live thing, and we were talking a little bit about IBC and THORChain. I was kind of comparing it IBC to like a bullet train in Japan, and everyone in Japan's like, well, why don't we just use the bullet train to get absolutely everywhere in the world, But like meanwhile, we're working on an airplane over here that could just hop over the ocean. You don't need to think about the bullet train when it comes to worldwide travel. Yeah. We need to expand, going across the ocean here, not going as quickly as we can from point A to point B.
Yeah, exactly. Like that seems to come up a lot, is like, well, how is this different from IBC or something? And it's like, well, IBC is like in the analogy, it's like, okay, that string of islands are well connected, but that string of islands isn't necessarily connected to all the other continents, right?
Right.
Whereas like,
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
and they argue that they're going to have integrations with these other continents, as we put it, like like Bitcoin and stuff. And I'm sure that will happen eventually. But I think the problem is that I see with that approach is that every chain is going to have a separate system, a separate security model, a separate economic model, a separate team that's building it. And you're going to end up with this kind of like Frankenstein scenario where like the bridge that connects everything is just kind of this weird, complicated thing where you don't even know what your exposure is anymore. And if any one of these, of the parts of this Frankenstein bridge has a kink in the armor, then the whole thing goes to shit. All the assets become at risk on every chain. And so I think where the difference is that as IBC doesn't actually have an economic model built into it. It doesn't have a security model built into it. It's really not even a bridge per se. It's really more of a communication standard of how chain A communicates with chain B. But the implementation of how that actually is done needs to be implemented on every chain, and probably going to be done uniquely, right? And I think that from a design perspective, from an architecture perspective, that might be problematic. And so for THORChain's perspective, we're just saying that we have this one implementation. It's not a protocol in the sense, or rather a communication standard, the way that IBC is, but it's actually one design implementation that guarantees economic safety, security, that has a specific set of security assumptions and designs that everybody can reason about, think about, and those all apply to every chain that connects into the THORChain ecosystem. That becomes a lot less of an attack vector. It becomes a lot less of a complexity to consider and understand of what you're actually getting involved with. I don't know, if I'm dealing with something in the IBC system, there might be a bridge that I'm not even involved with, that I don't even care about that ecosystem or that blockchain. And it was implemented in some way that's, problematic, maybe like a wormhole like scenario, what we saw, a few weeks ago. And everything else everything that I'm involved with gets put at risk. That becomes a significant problem, and this is my view. So I'm not really, I like the idea of IBC in many respects, but in terms of this idea of unifying all of crypto, I don't think it makes sense to me. It makes sense within Cosmos. I think that's a really interesting way of going at it within the Cosmos space. But once you get outside of Cosmos, you get into the rest of the world, especially outside the EVM chains, it gets a lot more scary and troublesome.
Yeah, there's something Vitalik touched on in that video too, where he was saying like how like bridges they're like inversely proportional. The more they scale, the less secure, right? And like there's more at stake. Like if you have $10 billion in a bridge, it's like, okay, now that's a huge target. If you have like, $1 million in a bridge, okay, maybe it can slide by okay and not be a huge risk. But it's like the problem would just compound and compound and compound if we continue down this route until you just have like this, like you said, Frankenstein combination of all these weird routes and bridges and wrapping and all this stuff going on, versus with THORChain, it just has this like complex but actually relatively like simple fundamental idea, which is that like it's just this economic security design where you have nodes that are essentially like controlling wallets on all these various chains and watching what's happening and just watching what's coming in, approving what's going out. Like it's actually really, really simple and elegant, and there's just economic drivers that are creating the security, and therefore it doesn't care like about which sort of like technical stuff each thing is using, right? It's just like, as long as it can just like monitor what's going on and have the same economic drivers like holding it secure, then it'll work for everything.
Yeah, I think as complicated as THORChain is, and it needs to be complicated because the problem it's solving is very complex and difficult, and partially why it hasn't been solved for years. But I'd much rather try to understand one implementation of a cross-chain bridge than trying to understand 17 of them, which might be the result of what we might see in a Frankenstein bridge, where every chain has its own team that built its own security and its own system that has to be understood and read about and considered. Whereas in our case, just like you need to understand the THORChain design, that's it. And it's universally worked with everything in the space, whether you're EVM chain or your UTXO chain or your proof of history chain, it doesn't matter. It's all treated identically the same. And so it becomes a lot easier to reason about for that matter.
Chad, one thing that I've seen a couple questions on is people are wondering if there will be hardware support for Luna supported on the release of Luna on THORChain.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a question for the UIs to solve in a sense. I hope so. It should be done. And I'm sure that the competition between THORswap and AsgardX and the other UIs will kind of garner that importance to do that. So yeah, I think it will happen eventually. But it's just a question of who's going to do it. Is it going to be XDeFi? Is it going to be THORswap? Is it going to be AsgardX? Who knows?
Well, XDeFi and TerraStation can already work with Ledger. So unless I just don't understand something technically, I would think, assuming you can connect those wallets, like wouldn't those ones automatically already be compatible?
I don't know, to be honest. I haven't spent much time working on the Ledger implementation personally, so I don't have a deep understanding of it. But I would imagine that once we do one Cosmos chain, which technically THORChain itself is, I would imagine it'd be pretty simple to implement one for Terra and one for Gaia and one for these Cosmos-based chains.
Got it. Yeah, I'll have to check on that. But yeah, my assumption was XDeFi and TerraStation at the least would be possible right away, just because those already work with Ledger, just generally.
Yeah,
so
that could be true. I mean, once we had the BDC ledgers set up, we had access to all the other ETXL chains like Doge and Litecoin and others. So it very well could be true. I actually don't know.
Cool. Yeah, I'll try to check on that.
There's a couple other questions that are in the comment section. Just so anyone knows, anyone can ask questions here or raise your hand to come up on stage to ask Chad a question. So in the comments to the original post announcing that the space was going on, there's a question from Runatic. A few questions. Minting synthetics allows for pool depth to increase, but not for liquidity to increase. Is there any risk for synthetics limiting liquidity in pools?
Well, I agree with half that question. Minting synthetics does increase the depth of the pools. And it also, depending on how you define the word liquidity, because it's an overutilized term meaning many different things, it does probably mean that the liquidity also increases with it. And the reason why that is because the deeper a pool is, the cheaper the fees are. And the cheaper the fees are, the more likely you're going to have more swaps and trades because the fees are cheaper. So there will be limitations in terms of how many synthetics can be minted on the network to not overexpose the LPs to too much kind of leverage in a sense. But every time somebody mints a synthetic, the pools get deeper, and that should also increase liquidity as well.
Awesome. To add that. If I could add just a little bit on that, I think like the sort of concern there, me and Cal were kind of talking about this yesterday, but like, so if you're creating a synth, it's going to the pool. So that's like a 1-to-1, basically. It's like that synth is being minted against its equivalent new LP being added. So it's like, yeah, there's liquidity depth being added there, but it's not like new, like it doesn't add, it kind of like hits the cap of where more synths could be minted, right? Like by adding the synth, you're just adding the equivalent. So I feel like the question is kind of like, is there any concern about just like having enough liquid, like the demand for the single-sided synths could be so crazy, right? So I think the question is like, like pairing, like how do you deepen the overall depth to like accommodate synths, since having space, even though it does increase the pool depth, but it doesn't increase the ability to mint more synths against that, right?
It does, but not like a 1-to-1. So like the act of adding a synth will naturally increase the depth of the pool, which will naturally increase the quantity of synths that can be on the network. But it won't be like oh, I minted a synth and therefore one synth is, also available. Actually, I think it's like mathematically it's reductive. So you would like, if you minted one synth, one BDC, for example, you might, add, I think it's like probably like, if I do the math out, I think it would be like probably close to like a third of a cent or like a quarter of a cent or something like this. I'm actually like the number off the top of my head, but you are actually increasing the depth, and by doing so, in this case, in the synthetic case, you're actually adding rune to the pool, which causes arbitrage to happen to add in Bitcoin to the pool. And because Bitcoin's depth is now increased because of that rune that you added, more synths can technically be supported on that network. Does that make sense?
Yeah, awesome, cool. We have a few requests, so
let me just ask the other question that is up on.
Oh, sure.
That is up in the comments, and then we'll get to everyone that
just to clarify though, there will be a cap on synths, and there will be times possibly where people can't acquire a synthetic asset, and that's okay, right? That I don't particularly have an issue with that. That's just going to cause more demand for deepening the pool further, and once the pool gets further deepened, that'll open up slots in a sense to acquire a synthetic asset.
Yeah, we were even throwing out like the concept of like, I know how like the synth vaults are intended to be fixed, like savings, but like hypothetically, what if there was almost like an incentive pendulum between that, where it would like, if the synth cap was like always hit, then like more rewards would go to the LP. I guess that kind of happens naturally in a sense. But yeah, it could be interesting.
Yeah, I think we'll have to see what happens. Like in reality, you can talk about theoretically what may happen in situation A or B, but you really don't know for certain until the actual economics is pushing it. So when we launch synthetics, we'll keep the caps very small, just to reduce the exposure, just in case there's some sort of issue. It won't be a big issue in a sense, but we'll see what the behavior is and see what happens, and that will help kind of educate myself and the rest of the community about the actual behavior of synthetics, and we might choose to make a design change to the economics to do what you were suggesting, Chad. So we don't really quite know in a sense. We have to wait until see how the economics play out and adjust as we need to.
For sure. And just to clarify one thing for people, when synths initially come out, that's just the synths. The synth vaults to earn like fixed yield and stuff, that's like a later THORFi feature. So I think that's when like we'll really see the demand for synths kick up like crazy. The trading is still huge, and I think that'll drive a lot of volume and drive a lot of fees and stuff. But I think when people can lock up, essentially earn Bitcoin on Bitcoin single sided, I mean that's like the best product in all of DeFi. So
yeah, and like I was just talking to Gavin over at Nine Realms yesterday, and he was saying how like that part of what Nine Realms is doing is trying to like talk to kind of whales in a sense and get them more liquidity into THORChain and kind of garner that relationships and stuff. And there's a lot of liquidity that he basically has access to, or people that he talks to that have a lot of liquidity, and a lot of them they don't want to take on the rune exposure. They're just Bitcoin people, they're Ethereum people or whatever, and they're not necessarily rune warriors in a sense, and they want single access, single liquidity, single asset exposure, and Thor savings is going to be, I think, a good thing for them, for those people. But that's one of the problems we have to solve. Is like, well, how much Thor savings can the network take and still remain economically secure? And that's going to be something that we're going to have to work out in time. But you're right. When we first launch synthetics, the only people that are going to really hold synthetics are people who want to trade back and forth, like for faster, more efficient trades, or arbitrage bots who want to arbitrage the pools and earn a yield.
Cool. So this is a question that's actually related. So it's also two questions in one. The question is if there is an updated THORFi roadmap, and also whether that includes iRune, or basically the single-sided exposure to a rune yield. So that's kind of a two-sided question there. But updated THORFi roadmap?
Yeah. So we've been chatting about THORFi for quite a while. We are now on, I think, V5 or V6 or whatever it is. We keep on changing some things, or not changing, but more accurately fine-tuning. I was even talking to somebody over at Delphi last night, about the design and trying to get his thoughts and feelings. And he seemed pretty bullish on the idea and the design pattern. But iRune is an interesting topic, though, because there's some inherent problems with iRune. And that is that we want to make sure that the rune that the network has, that is contributed by its community, is being actively participating in the network itself, in the sense that it's providing a service. Like if THORChain were to say hypothetically today that you can now stake your rune into the node, similar to what you can do on Gaia or Terra, and you can earn a 10% yield or whatever the hell the number would be, that wouldn't be helpful for the network itself, because all that's really happening is you're locking up a bunch of rune out of the ecosystem, and you're not making the pools deeper. You're not actually increasing the bond. Maybe you could argue that you're reducing the circulating supply and therefore pushing the price up. Okay, all right, maybe that. But you're not actually participating in the network and actually contributing to what it's actually trying to accomplish, which is really its bread and butter. It's liquidity pools. So iRune, if it is ever implemented, it needs to be implemented in a way that it contributes to the goals of the network, and it's not just a yield-bearing thing for the purpose of yield-bearing. That's not how this can or should work, at least in my 2 cents opinion. There might be a mechanism to do that in the future. Like you could do, potentially rune on the Thor savings, possibly, but I would be kind of hesitant to do so because the act of doing so would actually cause a sell pressure on the rune asset naturally, because you're adding rune to the network, into the pools, which means that the rune side is deeper on, and then in the pool, which means people are going to buy Bitcoin to sell rune, or buy Ethereum to sell rune, buy USDC to sell rune. So that creates a natural sell pressure, which I don't think we want to have that kind of experience either. So we haven't really came up with an iRune design that makes sense to me quite yet. That doesn't contribute to the network in one form or another. Maybe we could do something where we have a pool of rune that is just dynamically moving between all of the pools, and your exposure is just on the rune side and not the asset side. And that way your rune is being contributed to the network and you're actually contributing to make the pools deeper. Maybe something like that might be possible. But in this time, I don't have a design pattern in mind that would satisfy the needs of the network, other than the light node system and vault system. Like that is something where you just have rune exposure, and you don't need to be technically a Linux master, and you don't need to have 300,000 rune. You could do it with 30 rune if you really wanted to. So that's probably going to be one of the mechanisms in the future where you can earn rune on your rune. It would be light nodes.
Right. I think you've touched on that before, and it makes a lot of sense to me. The other part of that question is there a updated THORFi roadmap coming soon?
Yeah. We floated some design ideas towards Delphi earlier, like this is like a month ago or so, back in January, I think it was. February, early February. And Delphi was not, they didn't like some of the aspects of that design. And then we took it to Multicoin, and Multicoin did like that design implementation. And since then, we've made some tweaks and adjustments based upon the feedback we got from Delphi. And I was just talking to the guy last night here over the Delphi party in East Denver, and kind of shared some of the design aspects to it. And he seemed much more bullish on it today than he was a month ago. So we're definitely getting closer and closer to the design idea that we've kind of spent a lot of time thinking through. And we do definitely want to get it out to the community relatively soon to kind of get some feedback and thoughts and opinions, because there are some design elements to this thing that is unheard of in the DeFi space that is really challenges core assumptions about how DeFi functions and what is and is not possible. And so it's a pretty ambitious design, to say the least. And so there will be very strong opinions in either direction on this thing for sure. And I'm happy to, talk to people, and we can do a Twitter Spaces or a stage within Discord, and people can, yell at me if they want to. And we can have a real good conversation about that, and people can decide whether or not they want to support this or don't support it. That's up to the community to decide. But hopefully I want to see this out to the community, probably not this month, but hopefully next month.
Cool. Thanks, Chad, for the update. And we're looking forward to whenever we can get more information on all that stuff. So, uh, whoever in the comments would like to come up, just make sure to press that request button. I see everyone that has requested already, and we'll get to you. So we'll just go. We'll just go in order here. We'll go down the road, and yeah, whoever wants to come up, just press that request button, and we'll make sure there's enough time for you to ask your question, as long as Chad B doesn't have anywhere to be. So, Marty, what's up, man? Welcome.
Thanks. So my questions are very prosaic. It was a great discussion. But so we're going to get IBC, and we're going to be able to move UST into the THORChain. So could you give me some noob, kind of insight when it comes to what kind of pools, UST is going to be in, and what's your perception of the depth, within a week of those pools? That would
Sure. Yeah, so one thing is it's not IBC. So THORChain is actually going to have actual Terra addresses on the Terra network. It's not actually being beamed across by IBC. That's the first thing. The second question I think I heard you ask is what kind of depth it's going to have. That I don't really quite know. I expect it to be, if I'm just going to take a wild guess here, I'm expecting to be a few million within the first week, or at least like maybe 10 million. I hope to see it to break 30 within 2 or 3 weeks, hopefully. But I don't have a crystal ball, so I really have no idea. It's really depending upon the community to decide how much money they want to put behind it.
Okay, so maybe more specifically here. So what are your, target pools with UST in them? Sorry.
So there's only going to be one pool with UST in it, and there's only going to be one pool with Luna in it. So when we launch Terra integration, there'll be 2 pools created where you can get UST and Luna from, or trade between. So there'll only be 2. But you have access to every asset. You can trade your UST to Bitcoin, UST to Ethereum, UST to USDC, or vice versa. You'll have access to every asset in the THORChain ecosystem.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Marty. Next, Moonkin. Hello.
Right. Yeah. Sorry about that. Hey guys, as always, thanks for the insights. I just had a question on. I heard you guys mention like a couple of weeks back, or a week or so ago back, regarding the hack like last year, and as to how it pertained to like the properties of ERC20s, Ethereum tokens. And why was that the case? Why were those particularly, at risk or compromised? And maybe something as to why that might not be the case when introducing UST or Luna. Thanks.
Yeah, so in the exploits that we experienced back in the summer, all of them were around the Ethereum ecosystem. In one case, there was somebody created an ERC20 token that looked like Ethereum and convinced the network that it was actually Ethereum, which obviously it's not. And a few other ones where somebody sent a transaction of 1,000 ETH to their own contract and then forwarded the transaction to our contract, leaving the ETH in their contract, but the transaction details said, oh, this transaction has 1,000 ETH in it. Like that created another problem early on. Ethereum is very kind of funky in some ways from a security perspective. The fact that you can manipulate transaction information at all is just befuddles me as an engineer. It's just that it lets me know that security wasn't really kind of a core concept in the design and implementation of Solidity and all this kind of stuff. But that's why we're concerned about COSM WASM on Terra, is that you can have a potentially a similar situation, which is why we're taking a more defensive approach and not allowing random COSM WASM applications to integrate with THORChain, or random random smart contracts on Ethereum to integrate with THORChain. It just creates so much avenue for exposure so much risk in surface attacks that it's just not worth it, to be honest with you. And so you can still integrate with those things. You just got to whitelist them. So any smart contract that wants to interface with THORChain goes through a vetting process first. And our THORSec team, or professionals at this, will go through that code and audit it, make sure it's on the level and there's nothing malicious there or anything like that. And then we'll whitelist it and expand the capabilities of THORChain. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much. Like, the specific properties of the Ethereum blockchain and how you're able to edit transaction information is why what led to the exploit. So, if I may, then, so native assets, they aren't really susceptible to the same sort of risks then, like just trading Luna
Correct.
for Bitcoin or UST for Bitcoin. Yep. Like we should be feeling pretty safe around those.
Right. Correct.
All right. Yeah, cool. Thank you guys very much.
Yep, no worries.
Cool. Thank you, Moonkin. Next up, Zook.
Hey guys, thanks for doing these weekly spaces. It's really great to get regular updates on the project. I'm a big fan of THORChain. I've been following you guys for 3 months or so. I've got my Luna ready and my Rune ready for the pool. So I'm going to be an LP once that launches. My question is about Rune tokenomics, especially the emission of Rune. I'd like to know if Rune is an inflationary asset. Is there going to be a lot of Rune created in the future? Could you please give me just an overview of Rune emission schedule? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, so the Rune as an asset today is 100% pre-mined. And that's the total supply. Originally actually was a 1 billion coins, and actually we went through a process to burn half of that many months ago. But so right now it's a 500 million total supply can exist. The vast majority of that is sitting in the reserve, which is owned and controlled by the network itself. The treasury has some Rune, relatively speaking, it's not very much to what the reserve has. And that emission schedule was recently, I think we recently doubled it like 2 months ago by popular demand of the community. So that emission schedule is somewhat similar to Bitcoin's emission schedule a little bit, and should last, technically should last infinitely. This is kind of a funny idea, but the Rune in the reserve technically is actually infinite, even though it's a limited supply, and that's because the reserve emits a block of reward, and every block is less than the previous block. The amount of Rune emitted is less and less and less and less and less and less. And so you have this kind of, you graph that out, you get this thing that's kind of asymptotes to zero, but never really gets to zero. And in addition to that, you have an income into the reserve of Rune being put in through swaps, through Thor names, through other mechanisms, banning, I guess that's it as well. And so that all has income into the network, so it kind of keeps it topped up, so that it'll always kind of exist. It'll always have Rune sitting in there, and it gets to a point where it gets kind of, the supply and the demand equal each other within the reserve, and just kind of stays stationary there, just to some regard. But that could change. One of the ideas we've been thinking about within THORFi, and this is something the community would have to vote on and decide whether or not they want to do this or do not want to do this. Is the idea that if we were to do a stablecoin, theoretically, and we were to kind of mimic very strongly the UST model, where you're burning and minting Rune, and you're burning and minting, UST, or our case might be, USD or Thor USD might be called, then that would change the monetary policy of the Rune asset. And so people have to kind of figure for themselves whether they like that or don't like that, support it or don't support it. And the community kind of makes a determination, and we move forward in whatever direction that is.
Cool. Just one concern that I have around that is that sometimes on these weekly calls, we hear about THORFi and having a savings account similar to Anchor Earn on Luna. But Anchor Earn is having problems with their yield reserve, and the model doesn't seem sustainable. So my worry is that Rune would be printed to subsidize a high savings rate on a THORFi savings account. Um, should I be concerned about that? Is that in the plans?
No. That's not in the
Thank you.
plans. Let me put it another way. The interest the money that's earned, the capital that's earned to pay off Thor savings is not minted. The only time Rune gets minted is when you're, theoretically in this design, if the community wants to go forward with it, the only time it gets minted or burned is when somebody is burning, a Thor USD, which is similar to UST, or minting the other direction, right? It doesn't just mint Rune out of nothingness in order to pay the Thor savings. That would be, economically speaking, that would be a disaster. That's something I would personally kind of push against. So that's a completely different thing that would not be an issue within this context.
Maybe you could just expand a little on what does fund Thor savings.
Okay, excellent question. So two things. One is, I agree with what you're saying about with Anchor protocol being not sustainable. And I don't think anybody thinks that. I doubt even Do Kwon thinks that it's actually sustainable, and that's actually okay. They're just going to probably at some point reduce the yield from 20% down to something more reasonable. But for THORChain, the way that it generates the yield is that it's lending, and so people provide collateral, and that collateral is a yield-bearing asset, and generates a yield that the network keeps, and the network uses that yield to pay off the Thor savings stuff. Yeah. Okay,
thanks guys. Keep up the good work.
And to be clear, it generates yield through trading fees and and swaps that are going on the network. This is the only network that
Thor savings would not get yield from that. That goes to the LPs. The LPs keep their yield. It's not taking from the LPs in order to pay off the Thor savings. It's a different mechanism where the collateral is LP units and it is yield bearing, and so you're giving up your collateral as a lender or a borrower, and you're saying, I don't want to get the yield from this LP. Instead, I want to get this this loan asset, but maintain exposure to the original collateral that I added in, the Bitcoin and the Rune or the Ethereum and the Rune or whatever it is.
Yeah. The way I kind of see that is, Anchor's essentially doing the same thing. They're just doing it with staked assets, right? But I see what the problem probably is they're taking the staking yields, which are on average 10 or 12%, or probably less if you're factoring in the bonded ETH that they take as collateral to now, and then on Earn they're giving 19.5%. So it's okay, there's a gap there, right? And that's kind of probably why they have all the depletion problems and stuff like that. Whereas as far as I understand it, with the THORFi design, the LP units are that's, you can look at the APYs on the main THORChain pools right now, and you can see that it could fund, and the synth yield is going to be below that and fixed, but still it's more sustainable because it's not tied to just Ink token being farmed and all of that sort of thing. It's more just coming directly from those LP units.
Yeah, and the fixed rate interest that Thor savings would produce is not actually a fixed rate forever. It's not like Anchor where it's 20% and it's been that way for years or whatever the hell it is. It has a quarterly system. Every quarter it can update its interest rates to increase them or decrease them depending upon market conditions. And so even if you have a bank account with savings in there, like a regular bank account, they change their interest rates, every quarter or so, right? And THORChain effectively does the same thing, where you have reliable income for a quarter. The interest rates change; they go up or they go down depending upon market conditions, and you can choose to stay in or leave. Up to you.
Do you have any guesses as to the proportion between the fixed yield and the overall pool yield? Say for example, the Rune UST pool ends up being consistently a 30% APY. Do we have is it a 1-to-2 ratio, or like any thoughts on like what that proportion might end up looking like?
Yeah, I don't know. I have a good idea what the proportion look like. It will be less. Like if you have a single asset exposure and a fixed rate interest, the interest will be less than what you would get if you were an LP, right? Because you're paying for a system where you have less risk because it's fixed rate, and you're saying I want consistent income, and I don't want to worry about permanent loss, and I don't want to take on these additional risk aspects, and therefore you have less reward. But as an LP, you're taking on more risk because you're taking on exposure to two different assets. You're taking on a permanent loss exposure. You're taking on all these kind of things and variable rate interest rates, which depends upon market conditions and all these things. And so because of those, it's a more risk on relative to the other one. That will probably, and I would be shocked if it was not the case, but that will almost certainly generate a higher yield than what Thor savings would produce.
For sure. One thought real quick, just to put on my THORchad Moon Boy hat, but it's kind of crazy to imagine like if like synthetic UST vaults could end up like exceeding Anchor Earn, or if Anchor ended up using synthetics and vaults on the back end to like power stuff that they're doing, or taking in that as collateral. Like there's some really exciting ideas that are, all just kind of hypothesizing, but could get really interesting.
For sure.
All right, yeah, we're going to keep going to all these questions here. I'll let up one last person, and that'll be it for this week, but we'll get through everyone that's on the stage here as long as we have time.
Dan's had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, I was about to say, Dan,
cool.
Welcome, man.
Hey, everyone. Hope you're having a good day. I just had a quick question regarding kind of the governance model going forward. I know back in 2018, there was some discussion around having the node operators and the validators, as well as some delegators. And, my current understanding is that public delegation is no longer permitted, or is not permitted at all. And so, with planned obsolescence kind of right around the corner in the next couple months, I was curious if you could speak to, what the governance model would look like going forward after that point.
Sure. One is, I would say, planned obsolescence is not around the corner, I would say. I don't plan on stepping back from the project anytime soon. I just don't think it's ready quite yet, but I'm pushing to get to that place. It'll probably be closer to like the end of year. If I had to take a wager or a guess today, that would be my guess. The governance question. Governance is not necessarily a DAO like how it works in many other systems, which is has its own pros and cons in that implementation. In THORChain's case, every validator basically gets a single vote, and they can either adopt a change or don't adopt a change. If they want to see Terra, added, they can, run the Terra daemon and add it, and if the 2/3 majority, agrees on that, then Terra is now added. Or if we want to change some of the economic patterns or some of the economic concepts to tweak the, algos or any of these kind of things, that all requires a consensus of the nodes to make that kind of change. So in the end, it's really the validators who determine the path forward of the network itself. And they're also probably the biggest holders of Rune in the world, like collectively as a group. They have, 33 million Rune right now, which is more than, all the LPs combined and all these kinds of stuff. So they have the highest exposure to it. So they're incentivized more than anyone else to get it right, because they're highly exposed to this asset with millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. And they obviously don't want to make a change that threatens the Rune asset, the Rune price.
Right. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Thanks for kind of shedding some light in that direction. And then just based on that last question kind of got me thinking. So in the example that if you minted a synth that was backed by those LP units, and you're obviously getting less for the reasons you just described, less yield for those reasons, so let's say that the LP units are yielding 30%, and just for the sake of this argument, let's say that the synth was yielding 10% fixed, then where would that gap of 20%, where would that be flowing to? Would that flow back into the pools, or would that go to the reserve, or kind of what does that picture look like?
Well, it's slightly more complicated than that, because if the pool is generating 30% yield and you generate a synth, which means that you hold something that is pegged to the synthetic Bitcoin, let's just say, and whatever value that one BDC that you have, that 30% that one BDC you have would be earning, 100% of that goes to the LPs, the other LPs of the system. You're basically saying, I'm providing capital into the pool, but I forego any yield, any profit or loss. Actually, it works in both directions, if it's a permanent loss or whatever. And so you're saying, I forego any of this. I just want to hold an asset that is pegged to Bitcoin, let's just say. And so all that 30% of that one big BDC is going to all the other LPs of the system. And the 10% that Thor savings thing is generating is not coming from you as a regular LPer. It's coming from the collateral that somebody is using to get a loan, and that collateral is yield bearing and earning that 30% interest, right? And that is paying off that 10% to that Thor savings person, right? And the other 20% that's being made up, the differential between those two things is, it goes to the protocol itself, and that becomes protocol owned liquidity that is just further buffers and further supports Thor savings and lending and all these things to just make it deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper to make the network more economically like a juggernaut in some sense. But if you also have to think about like the ratios between these two things. So if I have $100 in collateral that's earning 30% yield, and in Thor savings we have $300 in Thor savings, those two things basically cancel each other out, because you're earning 30% on the $100 and you need 10% on the $300, and those two things are basically equal to each other at that point. And so it matters how much is being lent out, right? And how much is not so much being lent out, but how much collateral is put into the system to get a loan, and how much Thor savings exists that people are trying to get that asset, get yield on that fixed rate interest. So that kind of matters. So that all comes into the play, and the POL will kind of place a buffer between these two things. And then every 3 months, the network kind of changes the yield of Thor savings to kind of match what makes sense, right? Either it goes up or it goes down, depending upon which direction it needs to be moved. So if it finds that there's too much Thor savings and not enough loan, it'll probably ratchet down the interest rate on the Thor savings, which will cause some people to leave, which is fine, and it caused the yield that we are making in the collateral to be more than enough to pay off the Thor savings, and the POL will play that kind of cushion. If there's a little bit of a differential between these two things, the POL will be that kind of cushion to support it. And if it really needs to, it could probably get into the reserve in kind of extreme fucking wild scenarios. But I doubt that will ever actually happen in theory.
Right on. That totally connected that last dot for me. I really appreciate it. You all have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you, K Coefficient. Welcome back.
Hey guys, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
So thinking about the POL, protocol on liquidity, in that sense, have you all ever considered like a mercenary protocol owned arbitrage bot to fund, kind of go hand in hand with POL? Or is that really bad? Yeah.
I think in order to do what you're suggesting, at least how I'm thinking about it, this R bot would have to exist outside of the network, right? Because it needs to know what the market price is of Bitcoin or whatever, and it needs to know what the pool price of Bitcoin on THORChain, and then see a differential, and then generate the yield from correcting the pool price. Because it's off chain, that would for me kind of be a non-starter, because I'd rather just have the community do the off-chain stuff and not have THORChain try to expand beyond itself in a weird kind of way. So there's no intention within the core devs to build some sort of ARB bot. We feel that the ARBs out there that are doing ARB, they're doing a really good job of it. I mean, the pools are very correct. The pricing is kept well, I think, in my opinion. So they're doing a good job. I don't think we need the network to do anything additional to that, in my opinion. But the POL, it is important to have in some sense, because it helps keep the pools deep, even in bear cycles where people get a little bit jittery and are suffering losses, and they panic and FUD, and and like leave and all this kind of stuff. You don't want that. You want the pools to remain deep and remain liquid even in bear cycles. So the POL will mostly generate most of its income probably from the lending collateral.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I think a lot of people maybe don't understand the power of protocol-owned liquidity versus renting liquidity, or AKA, basically paying off liquidity providers with emissions, and protocol-owned liquidity changes that drastically. So that's all I have. Thanks, man.
Yeah, and in the design we talked about lending, like since the network is taking the yield from that collateral that people are providing, you as a borrower, you don't really care about if you're getting yield or not, because you're already agreed that you're not getting yield, right? And the network is giving you a 0% interest loan as a thank you, in a sense, right? So you're getting your loan for what you want to do with it. You're paying a 0% interest, which is, spectacular from your perspective. And so you might say to yourself, I want to 3x long my position of Bitcoin because I'm a Bitcoin maxi or something like this. And so you might provide a bunch of Bitcoin in the network, get LP units, provide that as collateral, get your loan, swap that out to Bitcoin. The Bitcoin comes back in as collateral, as a LP, and then you get that LP units, you put that as collateral for another loan, and then you just kind of, round robin this thing, 2 or 3 or 4 times, whatever you want to do. And each time you do that, you're making the pool deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, which is great. So now we're getting Bitcoin maxis effectively and Ethereum maxis or whatever to like, because they want to 3x long their position on some other asset, on Dogecoin or whatever, they're actually helping. We're letting them do what they're trying to accomplish by 3x long the position on an asset in a decentralized fashion without KYC. But at the same time, they're helping making the pools a lot deeper, which is really great for THORChain and great for the Rune asset, right? And so that's a very, very, very kind of like positive thing in a sense. But you don't care about the yield of that LP because you're not keeping it. The network's keeping it. So there's a potential, theoretically speaking, that the pools will eventually become all collateral for loans, and the LPs on regular LPs won't LP anymore because the incentive pendulum will push all the income to the nodes because the pools are getting deeper and deeper because they don't care about the fucking yield at all, right? And so so LPs might just choose to leave and say, I'm not going to LP anymore because I'm only getting 5% interest or whatever the hell it is, and we're going to go become a Thor savings person, and I'm going to get fixed rate interest on my thing or whatever. We don't, who knows? It's going to be a fascinating thing to see how that kind of unravels. But this is part of the conversation that the community should have and discuss and debate and argue. And I'm happy to be a part of that and kind of share a perspective and help educate for people to have informed perspectives and informed decisions about how they want to move forward.
Next up, we have Patriot. Thanks for waiting.
Hey guys, thank you so much. I wanted to talk about security a little bit, the safety of the network. I've been in THORChain now for a while. I got to experience the hacks, and I want to let you know I was emotionally prepared for more hacks. I really was. But you guys, batten down the hatches, Chad Barraford, we had THORSec, 9 Realms, and we haven't had a major hack as far as I know since. And I think you guys don't get enough credit for that. So good job. I mean, I'm fucking amazed. A question I have is aggregators. I am so excited for aggregators. It just blows my mind, But to me, it just seems that aggregators it's kind of like an externality of THORChain, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But I was wondering if you could speak to, having all these aggregators, or do you think that is an attack vector for someone who may not have our best interests at heart? Or do you feel like we can do that pretty safely?
Yeah, good question. No, I don't think it does not increase our attack surface. I would even go as far to say it does not increase our attack surface at all. Because in respect, all that's really happening is the only difference between an aggregator and no aggregator is that either a person's doing a swap, you're swapping your Bitcoin for Ethereum, or a DEX is doing it. And I don't really care. who's doing it, whether it's our bot, whether it's a person doing a random swap, or some DEX aggregator that's utilizing THORChain to gain access to more assets and more other DEXs to do more things. That doesn't, to me, mean anything. The only problem comes to be, and I think if we can protect the network successful against this idea, is that we have to we whitelist these DEXs against THORChain. Say that we will support incoming swaps from 1inch, right, to Gardner a trade somewhere else or something like this. And so the question becomes like, well, opening us up to 1inch to do trades, what is the risk involved with that? And I don't think there's much there, to be honest with you. I sincerely doubt that 1inch is going to attack THORChain, especially when we have a partnership with them and then we provide a very important service for them, and they want to have access to Bitcoin on 1inch because that just makes their DEX like a fuck ton better. So and all that can be done in a way that the THORSec team can audit all of that code and see it before it's changed or see it before it's deployed, and we can whitelist it and we get actually audited before we actually expose ourselves to such things. So I actually don't see, I mean, there is a potential risk, I suppose, but I see that as infinitesimally small.
Awesome, man. Hey, thanks for always keeping it real, bro. You're the best. That's it, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro.
Thank you, sir. Next up, Tabs. Thank you for coming.
Hi, thank you for having me. Is my mic working?
Yes, sir.
All right, great. Thank you so much for having me. I went back and listened to all of the recordings on YouTube. So whoever did the postings, thank you for posting. I've learned so much, and it's very exciting. And so the next thing I'm excited about for THORChain is the Rune Dash pair. And so I'm very excited about that because I've been using Dash for a while. And last year they released a Dash Direct feature where I've used it a couple times now. I've gone to my local merchants like a Lowe's, bought products with Dash, and I just it's all non-custodial, all non-KYC. And so I just think it's fascinating that can happen. And see, I started stacking sats, I guess, with BTC. And so now that I have BTC, I'm trying to figure out how do I spend it. And this is so far the best way to spend it for me is to turn the BTC into Dash. And unfortunately, I'm using centralized exchanges where they do KYC. And so with THORChain bringing Dash, I won't have to worry about the KYC part anymore. So very excited about that. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Yeah, I heard about this Dash Direct stuff. It sounds, when I first heard it, it sounded like it couldn't be true without being some sort of legal issue. Transacting in fiat currency without KYC to me sounds like it's not legally possible. But I remember the guys behind it, they tweeted at me and said some things, and I honestly haven't dived into the depth to actually validate that stuff for myself. But assuming that it is true, then it is legit and it is legal and all these kind of things, that's a really fascinating idea. And you're right. Once when Dash gets integrated with THORChain, you'd be able to trade your Bitcoin or any asset. You can even do your USDT or C or whatever it is, which is pretty interesting for sure.
Yeah, and certainly the thing that I think Dash solved is they're trying to be digital cash. So it's really fast. It's instant, basically. And by instant, I mean like under 2 seconds, which is what is needed. Like I'm standing at the Lowe's checkout kiosk, and basically I say pay with gift card is how Dash Direct works, is it uses the gift card path. And so at the cash register, I say pay with gift card, and then it tells me, it asks me for a gift card code. And so that's when I pull up the Dash Direct app and I basically punch in the total. And then once I have the total, I then go into my Dash app, which is non-custodial. I hold the keys, and then I send Dash right into Dash Direct. And that's less than 2 seconds. And then the Dash Direct turns that into a gift card code that I then punch into the kiosk. And then I'm paid at Lowe's and I go off with my products. So yeah, it works pretty seamlessly. You know, I had to do it a couple times to kind of really be quick at it. The first time it took, it is a few steps. But once I got the hang of it, it's awesome. And then the other thing about Dash is it does coin joins in the base layer protocol. Its masternode service provides that. And so, you don't want to pay your barista and then have him know how much money you have, right? Like that would be like a limitation for Bitcoin, for example. And so Dash solved that by having on-chain coin joins. So it's always good to coin join your hot wallet, and then that way you can go off and spend when you need to without losing your privacy.
Hey, Ted, you should get in touch with Chad THOReau and me, familiar account, not THORChain account. You should DM one of us. We'll set up a space for to learn more about Dash and things like that. Because we're definitely excited in the THORChain community, because it's just we want to learn about this stuff too. So I think that'd be cool to set something like that up in the future.
Yeah, happy to. And I'm not much of a public person, but I can certainly, there's plenty of Dash people that are. And so I'm happy to recommend some Dash people that I follow that would be happy to speak to you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Tebs. Next up, we have Iazemi. Thanks for coming back.
Hey, guys. I've been watching THORChain and its development for a year now, so it's pretty amazing what you guys did. One thing is that the other day when I've been off for a month or so, but before a month I used THORswap to do some swapping and to check how the system works and everything, and I saw that there's quite a delay in transaction. And then when I talked, and I was worried initially, then I head up to the team and I talked to them, and then they told me that there's a limit amount of that you can do it per one transaction, and this was because to increase security due to the past exploits that happened in the summer. My question is when do you think that these limitation in transaction will be removed, or are they already removed? And also about the efficiency of the transaction, of the swaps, this is what I want to ask, basically.
Yeah. So one is you can make several swaps at once. That's okay. There's no limitation on the number of trades you can do. You don't have to limit you to one at a time or anything like this. You can actually do multiple trades if you want to. That's fine. What does happen though is that relative to the amount of trade volume that's happening at that time, the network will naturally and intentionally slow or delay outbound transactions. This is one of the changes that were made post the exploits back in the summer. The reason why that's there is that it gives the community time, specifically the donor operators, to notice there's some sort of large trade happening or a series of funds happening that might look suspicious, and that gives them the ability to react and stop those funds from leaving the network and stop the network from even getting exploited. I think as a network, I think we need something like that. This is my 2 cents. I think we need something like that because we're interfacing with all these other chains and we're taking on the risks of those other chains. And so we can't entirely go to a place of instantaneous swaps because it inherently puts us into a security-related problem. And it's my view. Now, the community can change this right now if they wanted to. They can turn it off today. All it takes is a node Mimir to change one or two settings and Mimir, and they can just disable that today, and everything, all the swaps go out, immediately. That's up to the community to decide. My personal 2 cents is I like the way it's designed now, even though you're right, it does kind of inhibit UX to some degree. But I'll trade that little delay of some transactions and particularly noisy scenarios just to ensure that people's funds are safe. That's a fair trade in my view.
I agree. I totally agree, especially in these stages that when you connect with other chains, it's necessary to do that. But in my view, and also I believe in community view also, is that THORChain will be one of the biggest liquidity providers, or the back end of the most, one of the biggest in the whole crypto industry. And when you take that into consideration, what I believe in 5 years from now, or in 2-3 years from now, crypto will be like 5 trillion in market cap, total market cap, and then the amount of transaction in the amount of swaps, I think, will increase, and also with new interfaces such as DeFi Spot wallet and the other exchanges that they may use THORChain. My main concern is that does the community, because I agree it's a very good. I would also do this and lose some seconds and increase and know that it's safe, but in the future, I think the delay time will increase because the transaction volume will increase also. So, is there any discussion within the community to kind of change this and adjust this
Yeah,
in
so
the future?
there's a couple of things to think about here. One is that the delay will not increase with trade volume. The max a trade can be delayed is 1 hour. And I don't care if we're getting $1 billion in traffic, next year or whatever, hypothetically, it would stay the same, because I don't think the network needs more than an hour to respond to some sort of suspicious activity or what have you. And so it'll always be, I think, at least in my opinion, it'll always be probably no longer than an hour, even in high volume trades. The other thing is that the network can determine to how sensitive do we want the network to be, to like how much volume is needed to slow it to 30 minutes or to 40 minutes or to 60 minutes. And so that those are just configurations of the network that Mimir can kind of change depending upon things. So if things become more trade volume starts to happen every day, where you're doing like 30 times the trade volume we're doing today, for example, then we can just change those little kind of those settings and those configs and just say, okay, we're going to make it less sensitive, and that's just a trade-off that the network can, the validators of the network can kind of discuss and understand the implications of these changes, and then, advocate for a position.
Okay. One last thing is that I was thinking the other day about this, and is there any possible way because I think the networks understand the amount of swap and the amount of value that is doing. So I was thinking for low transaction swaps to do them instantly, as long as they don't come in a loop, that they happen 100 times for $100, for example, or 1,000 times for $100, because there might be exploits. But for example, if I want to swap only $100, that doesn't have to be delayed or something, because it's only $100, and you can.
That's exactly how it works today. That's exactly how it works today. So if there's only $100 being traded in the system, and just you're the one doing the swap, then the trade will go through instantly, right? The swap will come, the outbound will happen now. But if you're doing $100 and Familiar Cow is doing $100 and THOReau is doing $100 and so forth and so on, then that changes the dynamics. Because I don't actually know from a network perspective whether or not you, THOReau, or Familiar Cow are actually three different people. All I know is that it's coming from three different wallets, which is not necessarily three different people. And so what you're describing is exactly how the network works. I think what happened probably is that at the time that you were doing your trade, at whatever time that was, the network happened to be having a large volume of either trades or withdrawals, and then you kind of had like just bad timing in a sense.
Yes, that was the reason. When I talked to the community in Discord, they told me that the network is having some huge demands, and that's basically the main reason for swaps. But yeah, I mean, that's since I joined in this weekly live. Thank you guys for everything you're doing. This community communication is amazing, and just best of luck in the future.
Thank you.
I saw a related question to this. I forget who asked it. I can't seem to find it on the space tweet, but somebody was asking about if any of the throttling would apply to synths. So I'm curious how that might play in, or if anything applies or not.
Yeah, good question. So the throttling only applies to non-native assets. And the reason why that is because if you have an exploit in Ethereum, let's just say, and you're able to convince the network and swap a bunch of, a fake F into Rune, for example, that's actually in some sense okay, in the sense that the value that has been stolen is still in the network. It's still on chain. And so the network, the validators of the network can kind of come together and say, all right, they swap it into this Thor address. We're just going to go ahead and take the rune from that Thor address back out of that wallet and put it back into the pool again, and then everything's fine in the world, right? So when it comes to things that are on chain, because the value doesn't leave the network, we don't need a delay because the community can just come together and say, this person, did an exploit and they minted a bunch of synthetics. So we're just going to take the synthetics from their Thor wallet and then, put it back into the pool or whatever the hell it is to make everybody right, to make everything, correct in a sense. It only becomes problematic when the value exits the network in the form of Bitcoin or Ethereum or Luna or whatever. And that's why you need the F-bounds for the external assets, but not the internal ones.
So in the synth example, it would basically be on the redemption. Like it would be if you're redeeming, like you could swap like $1 billion of synthetic ETH to $1 billion of synthetic Bitcoin. But then if you were converting that back to real Bitcoin in your own address, is that where it would take place?
That's where the delay would actually take place. But as long as you're trading synth to synth or synth to rune or something like this, that there's no delay. And and the volume of that trade does not add to the delay of the layer one trades that people are doing in that moment. It only takes into account the layer one trades of the rune value of the layer one trades that are currently happening outside of leaving the network. And so that's part of the reason why arbitragers will like this feature of synthetics, is because they can arbitrage so much faster, so much cheaper. They don't have to worry about their trade taking an extra hour for it to, hit their Bitcoin wallet or their Ethereum wallet.
Get the last question up here. Arno, thanks for waiting. Welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me up and allowing me to ask a question. And thanks for hosting this. It's awesome. My question, I kind of want to bring back to LPing and THORsave and a little bit about centralized exchanges. So right now, I love THORChain because of obviously the swapping and the liquidity providing, and I'm looking forward to THORsave. But I would like more clarity on what happens with THORsave. Now, for instance, right now on centralized exchanges, I'm wary of participating in their staking, programs, because oftentimes, our assets end up in their big bag where they, loan out, and sometimes to entities that use those assets, our assets, to short our positions in a way. So my question is, with THORsave, I know it will be provided as collaterals for loans, but are those loans going to become like basically another tool for where big entities can come borrow our assets and then use them to undermine the cryptos we love, for instance?
Yeah, so it hasn't really been quite determined yet how that will work. One of the ideas, there's two approaches that's currently being considered and thought through, and it needs to be more time to do some research and such. But one of the ideas is that when you put in your collateral into a loan, and then you get your debt asset, that could either come from Thor savings and then lend out the debt asset, or it could come from the reserve, where we swap the rune in the reserve for the debt that you're taking, and then send that out, right? So the Thor savings it's not being borrowed against Thor savings; it's being borrowed against the reserve instead. Which the reserve is, it's worth like, I don't know how much money right now. It's probably like over $1 billion or something crazy, and so it can take that stuff all day in a sense, right? But that hasn't really been determined yet, and there's different pros and cons to both of those approaches, and so the community will, that's another thing the community will have to discuss and debate and think about and reason about to figure what actually makes the most sense. But even in the model that we've discussed about lending out from Thor savings, the way the economics works is that it'll make it always so that approximately 20 or 30 or 40% of the Thor savings will stay in, like, on hand and not lent out. So that gives you that kind of 30% buffer to always have something on hand to withdraw, if somebody wants to withdraw. And we've even talked about some notions of that, like when you deposit into Thor savings, that it gets locked in the network for like 100 days. Like you're kind of agreeing to be, all right, I'm going to take a position on here. Because we don't want yield farmers to be using Thor savings. We want people who jump in and stay in for months, if not years. That's a better scenario for the network in order to foster a more economically solvent system. And so what the network might do is say, you put in your Thor savings, you're locked up for 100 days. You can't extract your Thor savings for 100 days, which if you're doing this anyway, that's probably, more than fine. And then after the 100 days, if you want to take what you've earned and then restake it back in, right, to kind of compound your interest in a sense, then you basically reset that clock again to 100 days again, right? And so at the end of the result is that 98% or 97% of the assets in Thor savings are locked up, and they're not withdrawable, right? And that makes the idea of having a bank run of some kind not possible. It actually, you could possibly have a bank crawl over the time span of 100 days, which if that's the case, then that's a much easier situation for the network to deal with, because we have time to actually consider and think through and come up with a solution to whatever issue that might be having, in order to ensure that the safety of all the economics of the system. Does that make sense? I hope that answered your question.
That's really well thought out, and I like the sound of it. I was more so thinking, for right now, when I liquidity provide, I feel good because I know my assets are being used to swap and not being loaned out by I don't know who. With the Thor saving program, my question is more so, is there the possibility of us, like, let's say, offering these assets to, like, market players who can undermine our assets, for instance? Like, can anyone just come in and borrow the funds and then bring them back, I guess?
Anybody come in and borrow the funds and then bring them back? That mean you're saying, like, open up a loan position and then repay the loan instantly? Is that what you mean?
I'm sorry, maybe I'm not explaining myself too well. Basically, I'm trying to figure out if we participate in THORsave, would our funds be available for, let's say, a hedge fund manager to borrow our funds, short, let's say, our asset, and then repay at a later date, but like cause a bunch of havoc with our assets.
Yeah, that all depends upon where the debt asset comes from. When you provide collateral and then you get some sort of debt asset, the collateral stays in the pool to generate the yield so that the network can benefit and profit and prosper and all these things. But the debt that they're taking out has to come from somewhere. And the question is, where does that come from? And if it comes from your savings, then your situation that you're talking about, maybe that's possible, right? Maybe the situation is possible. In the scenario where it's coming from the reserve, then it's not, your Thor savings is not being utilized in that context. It's not being, borrowed upon, right? Or even another situation, which you probably wouldn't do, but it's possible, is just mint the rune from basically nothingness, inflate the supply, and then give the person the borrower that rune, and then swap that into some asset they want, Bitcoin or whatever. And so there, you're now, instead of borrowing it from the reserve, you're borrowing it from every rune holder. Everybody gets inflated, and the value of the rune kind of gets redistributed towards this one individual who's taking this loan. And so that's, you could make there's obvious reasons why I wouldn't want to do something like that, because I wouldn't want to punish every rune holder for taking on a loan. Because someone got taken on a loan, it makes more sense to use a reserve for this purpose. But it all depends upon where the debt comes from, to answer your question more directly.
Yes.
Which that hasn't been determined yet. And that's something that people can talk about and discuss and debate and all that stuff.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Awesome. And so everyone knows, we do this every single week. The THORChain Weekly Live Update. We try and get either Chad on here or another core dev from the Nine Realms team. So the team is very open and transparent. Chad THOReau and I just host this show, but we have some amazing team members on here that you can see they've really thought about all this stuff a lot and are welcoming everyone's questions. And I just appreciate how transparent everyone is here because it's a great community to be a part of.
Yeah, thank you.
So there's a couple things hot off the press here. While this is all ongoing, I've been seeing a couple things. First off, the Thor games for synths have been extended an additional week as per Orion. So there's going to be another additional week of wargaming synths, which is available to anyone who wants to participate. And there are rune bounties available for those who are able to find and disclose bugs or attack vectors on synthetics. And this is all happening on StageNet. So info I believe is in the dev Discord. So that's one thing I was just seeing. Also, the DeFi spot people just low key posted that they would be allowing withdrawals and deposits up to $5,000, no KYC on their platform, which is extremely interesting, and I want to learn more about that. So, is there any ecosystem projects that like to come up? I see THORswap is here. I don't know if anyone's welcome from the ecosystem to come and share updates from whatever they're working on. So, by all means.
One thing that I just got from Gavin, I'm going to post this tweet, I think it is, into the or pin it, whatever you call it, was the correct term here. If you're a Terra developer interested in connecting with the THORChain team, and DM Nine Realms team to ping or ping us on Discord. We're cooking up something interesting. So if you're a Cosmwasm person, it sounds like, I think I know what they're talking about here, but I'm not 100% sure. But if you're a Cosmwasm developer, you're interested in helping out the THORChain team to do some interesting things, probably around deck aggregation, but I'm not sure. Reach out to the Nine Realms team and see if you can help.
Yeah, and I know, Chad, you're always like, the team is always looking for connections with people at and in all these different ecosystems. So if you know people in these ecosystems that might be interested in integrating THORChain, like some kind of aggregator, or just like people that are good to know, then like, Chad, is there specific people or projects that you're interested in finding people at?
Yeah, I mean, if you know somebody that works a part of a team that is building a wallet or building a DEX or anything like this, reach out to me. You can DM me, you can DM THORChain probably, or even Nine Realms, because we're interested in talking to every wallet manufacturer and every DEX out there, and getting them all kind of like interconnected within this new kind of permissionless system of moving across chain. So that's a really big thing, and it's beneficial for them just as much as it's beneficial to us as a project. So if anybody knows anybody over at 1 Inch or Exodus or Ledger, like anything, just let us know. We'll be happy to connect, and we'll probably even give you like a bounty for helping us make this connection.
Great, yeah. The more integrations for THORChain, the better, for sure. And I just feel like it's so unknown in this space right now that things are just really starting for us. So it's really exciting, man. And then also there's obviously a meetup at ETH Denver this weekend there's an RSVP link with the THORChain meetup details that's posted in the THORChain developer Discord. I believe there's a couple extra slots for people that are going.
Yeah, even if there's not slots, people just go anyway. We'll try to make space for you. I think we're actually already sold out, if I'm not mistaken, which is great because that shows a strong community around this project. But if you want to, we'll try to accompany allow as many people as the venue will allow us to get as many people into this thing to kind of talk THORChain or just hang out and drink a few beers and hit a few ping pong balls.
Yeah, and if you know Vitalik, bring Vitalik as your +1 to the THORChain.
If anybody knows Vitalik, have him come down. I guess I'll let him in. It'll be fine.
Yeah, and also just to announce, whoever we're going to be giving, me personally, like Familiar Cow and Veneer Threads are giving away a free pair of Thor Force 1 to some random THORChain community member that's there. So if you're there, you have a chance to win a free Thor Force 1 NFT redeemable for like the real thing, the real shoe. So just for all the Thor chads out there. So anything else, guys?
I think that's it for me. I'll see you all next Friday.
All right.
Yeah, sounds good. I think this was a good one. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. They're also recorded. If people hopped in at the end, you can check out the recordings just on the same space or on Runebase.
All right. Catch you guys later. Peace.
Cool.
Later.